Hey everyone, and welcome back for another council catch up. Today, we have none other than Scoriox back in the hot seat to answer all of our burning questions, or at least what we can have from April. April was kind of quiet. So honestly, we're just going to actually just kick it off, Scoriox, because it's been quiet. Like we had one town
Mm.
hall, but like there hasn't really been any meeting notes. There's been a couple of ICCPs, put up and passed and talked about. But can you tell us, like, what does this month look like for the council?
There's been a lot of internal discussions, especially with our legal counsel, Vic. And a lot of that stuff is obviously under NDA. I can't talk to
Mhm.
you about those discussions and what we've talked about and things like that. But we're coming near to the end of hopefully that chapter of governance. It was very, very important to us that it's finished before the end of the epoch, some of the major components that we're dealing with. And I'm pretty confident that's going to be the case. We definitely don't want that rolling over to the next epoch because that's going to be quite thrown in the deep end for any new council members and things like that. So that's been a large part of April. Besides that, we've also had the Illuvium and Land IIP, and we've had another Illuvium IIP. The safety pool? No, safety pool was March, right?
Uh,
Yes.
the well,
Yes.
the amendment to the safety pool is voted on.
Yes. Yes. Do you want to talk about that now?
I mean, yeah. I mean, so for those who don't know, ICCP 6, the Iluvatar and land royalties, was put up and voted on and came to a conclusion most recently. And actually, it was really interesting because during this last epoch, the council honestly has you guys are either for it or you are against it. There hasn't been a whole lot of like, wow, it comes down to the last vote. And this one it did. Like I remember looking at the votes come in, it was 2-2. And I'm sitting there trying to remember whose wallet's missing. And I'm like, this is interesting. Like, can you kind of, well, first off, give everyone a bit of an overview to what this was about, and let us know, like, what was that conversation like?
This ICCP is basically about putting all of the royalties from land and Illuvatars into the safety pool to make sure that we get up to that 15 mil cap so that the project is particularly safe if we are to see any worse macroeconomic conditions. Now, we're still pretty confident in the game getting launched on time and us having enough runway and everything, but it's to protect us in the case of some really unforeseen circumstances, right? So it's a safety pool, and the intent is still to distribute it to stakers if we don't need it. And hopefully we're not going to need it. So that's always been the intent. Obviously, Kieran has also more publicly, I think he actually publicly said this a long time ago, but he again said it more publicly that his 300K tokens that he's just got sitting in his wallet or whatever, the DAO can use them if we're desperate, if we need it, and things like that. They will be reserved for us to use. It's kind of like another buffer on top of the safety pool. So there's so many considerations that go into this sort of topic, right? And I want to talk a little bit on the past votes, and I don't think we've had any that have been close. This has been the first
Oh,
one.
okay,
Past epochs
interesting.
have had that a little bit. But as you said, I think it's pretty much all been 5-0 or 4-1, right? With
Yes.
these votes in the past epoch. And I will say that before every vote, or at least for a few weeks, even when discussions are happening, we discuss a lot of these topics really thoroughly. Okay. And we discuss them in voice, in chat, and whatever. We discuss them quite thoroughly, kind of where we sit on it. We try to convince each other or trying to swing one way or the other. There's a little bit of that, which I've found quite interesting. And it doesn't always happen. No one's getting like crazy swing votes and things, but sometimes it does. Anyways, so we always have a pretty thorough discussion, and sometimes we start off as like a 3-2 or a 2-2 or a 4-1 and things like that, and things move around quite frequently.
Mm.
And then we typically end the discussion with, okay, we're all happy, we're all pretty aligned on kind of where we think this is going to go and how we might want to vote moving forwards. And we usually have a pretty united front in the way we vote on these proposals. And that's why they
Mhm.
typically go one way. It doesn't always start that way, but we convince each other of our opinions and things like that. And then we talk about it. And then we start to make new opinions and things based on the discussion. So we're all quite unbiased and we're quite open minded, which I think is really good for any sort of governing body. And I've been really, really happy with that this entire epoch. The land royalties discussion was quite interesting. Now, we obviously ended up with a 3-2. Me being on the 2 side, I lost the vote. I rejected the proposal. But we were actually quite aligned on all of the topics in several different ways. the core problem, now I'm not speaking for the rest of the council here so
Yeah.
much, but I will say that every single council member, and you can see it in the council chamber's notes, every single council member is in favor of Illuvitar's royalties going to the safety pool. That
Mhm.
was 100% in favor of it. So if we had two separate votes here, it might have looked very differently. The land royalties going to the safety pool, we were for the most part pretty aligned with. I think I would have gone with it. Not sure what Annie would have said, but land royalties move from forwards moving onwards probably would have been pretty heavily for it as well. The retroactive land royalties, I was not a fan of. As you can
Mm.
see, Annie
Yeah.
was not a fan of, and among other things. It's worth noting that we have a lot of other information internally in the council that is affecting all the council decisions, things that I'm under an NDA for as well.
Mhm.
But basically, if you saw this split into three different votes, where you had land royalties going to future land royalties, past land royalties, and all Illuvitar's royalties. Illuvitar's royalties would have been all 5-0, easy.
Mhm.
Future land royalties probably would have been 4-1 or 5-0 going for. Retroactive land royalties, it would have been a bit of a different discussion. I don't know if it would have been rejected. It might have still been 3-2, but that was really a core point in all of this. And the fact that all these discussions were lumped into the one proposal
Mm.
meant that my belief on one part of that discussion was just too strong that I couldn't approve it. And it was just like that. Whereas the past proposals have been a little bit more coherent. This one, I said it in the discussions and ideas from the very beginning. If
Mhm.
retroactive land royalties is here, I don't think I'm going to approve it. And they almost convinced me otherwise. I will say they almost convinced me otherwise. So I kept an open mind as much as I could, but in the end, it just didn't go through. So that's kind of what happened with that entire discussion. It's quite an interesting case to study for future councils. I think is I'm a big fan of separating out proposals, but I know Kieran's likes to keep them as concise and direct as he can and things like that. And every council member is going to operate a little bit differently, but making sure that you're working as a team in how you operate with these proposals is going to be quite important.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see the process of proposals in Gov V2. Just because, you might bring something to the marketing subcouncil and,
Mm,
internally they'll decide if it's a proposal worth voting on. But it's not every member on the marketing subcouncil that makes that decision, right? It's going to be whoever they nominate to be on the high council or
mm.
whatever the term is that we're using, one from each of the subcouncils that are actually going to be having the power of that vote. And what do you think about that in terms like we have these specialized councils that ideally we're going to have a group of experts on marketing, on
Mhm.
gaming, on strategy, but in the end, they're only gonna get, one fifth of the votes when it comes to actually voting on this proposal. Do you feel like that's unfair? Like, if they think it's a good idea, so they're bringing it forward for a vote, but they're only getting like one fifth and they're the experts? Or do you just think it's like, hey, it's their responsibility to argue it well enough to get it passed if that's what they want?
Yeah, I think more on the latter, that it's their responsibility to argue. I have been talking to Rich about the way we set up. He's done a lot of the legwork already for the way we're setting up the future sub councils and things. But
Mhm.
there will definitely be ways for all of the marketing sub council to talk pretty freely with all of the other councils, right? So
Mhm.
they're all going to have larger group discussions to a certain extent. They'll try and keep it a bit more segregated if they can, because it'll make for better conversation, right? I mean, you have too many people in a room and it gets a little bit trickier. But there's definitely going to be discussion amongst everyone all in one go. But I like the idea of the other sub councils weighing in. I think that's really, really important. And this is one of the easiest ways to do it. There might be better ways to do it where a sub council has the power to, all three other sub councils have a power to like veto or something, but the marketing sub council votes on it first, and then they all have the power to come together and veto or something like that. But then there's just too many votes going on, you know what I mean? So this is kind of the best of both worlds where we're keeping it relatively linear and relatively coherent while still giving the other sub councils the freedom of their perspective and their ability
Mhm.
to vote on the proposal. Because, like, there's no proposal that's black and white,
True.
or more so, there's no proposal that applies to one sub council. All right, this if I wish that was the case, but that's not the case. I can't. I try to think of an example off the top of my head. If it was like a gaming proposal where you're trying to say T zeros are more powerful than they were before,
Mhm.
And then strategy might be like, oh no, we're going to lose a shit ton of revenue from doing something like that. We can't approach it that way. So, so every single sub council has a say in every single proposal. I think that's the way it needs to be. And you're
Mhm.
right. It's the job of that marketing IMC member that comes to them and says, look, guys, hopefully you guys listen to me. And I think this is a good idea, or I think this is a bad
Mhm.
idea. And I think we should go with it. Go with what I'm saying here. Please consider my opinions and thoughts, and hopefully I can convince you guys to vote with me. It is also worth mentioning that the team admin is going to be on
Mhm.
that council, and he would probably most directly liaison with that given sub council. So you've kind of got two members there a little bit, and he's more of an impartial vote as well. So he's got his own kind of overarching agenda for the entire DAO and a better picture of everyone. So he definitely
Mhm.
has to be voting on all the proposals, right? Or
Yeah.
he or she, but I think most people expect it to be Kieran, right? Um, but yeah, so there's that whole element to it. But I definitely think every sub council needs to throw an opinion into the vote, and this is the easiest, most coherent way to do that.
And something I kind of talked about when we were like discussing like how the sub councils are going to be talking about these proposals before it actually goes to the main council.
Hmm.
There's been a lot of discussion recently with Gov V2 coming up and nominations about qualifications and having qualified candidates. There are some people who are bothered or concerned. Let's say, we'll just use the word concerned, who are concerned that, a handful of the nominees or most nominees, um, they don't feel as though those people are qualified to be in these positions. And I'm kind of really curious because for where we are now, and I'm not talking about the type of people that will be on the council 2 years from now once we've hit, public beta. And maybe we have a bunch of fresh faces to come in, but looking at our community and the active members and what we know about them, because not everyone is free with the information about
Mm-hmm.
their public lives. What makes a good candidate? Like, and what would you think is unqualified, if that makes sense? Kind of walking the
There,
line there.
there's a lot to unpack here.
Mhm.
There's two key points I want to touch on before talking about what does make and not make qualified or unqualified. The first one is diversity in governing bodies is really important to me personally. I don't know how others feel about it. It's really important to me. For example, with the marketing sub council, I'm very biased in doing that. Okay. For example, with the gaming sub council, you don't want you don't want 4 game developers being elected on. You especially don't want it because your sub council core contributor is probably a game developer, right?
Yeah,
So you
true.
don't want all the people with the exact same skill sets. You would also assume with the similar skill sets, their brain and the way their code of ethics and the way they approach topics is all going to be really similar as well. So you've got a very
Mhm.
black and white view on that council, which is the last thing you want for any council. So you want a variety of different skill sets. Now, what this might look like on the game council is a little bit tricky. You want someone who's very good at esports, for example. You definitely want someone who's at the top of their field. You want someone who plays a large variety of games, maybe, so they understand different genres really, really well. You want someone who's maybe built their own game in the past, and maybe someone who's the CEO of a gaming company, but not necessarily a game dev. Like
Mhm.
there's so many different types of people that can contribute without being full game devs. And that's really, really important to me. So that's really critical. The other thing that's important to consider with Illuvium governance in general is it's very much a quantity game.
Mhm.
It's very much a hopefully you get 50 candidates and then you're definitely going to have 4 or 5 that are highly qualified. If
Mhm.
you only have a handful of candidates, there's a good chance some of them aren't going to be like have very, very good experience to fit into that council. And that's just the reality of the situation. I think it's important to encourage everyone to go in, and then you'll eventually get some qualified candidates or some people like that, rather than just being like, oh, only if you're qualified you should apply for council. That's really absurd, because then you'll get a bunch of really, really dodgy people for starters. I don't think that's appropriate. Like it's hard to put into words, but you get what I'm saying. It's just
Yeah.
making sure everyone gets involved, and then you'll be able to weed it out easily. And that's the other point I want to touch on is I have a lot of faith in the community.
Mhm.
I think it's not necessarily the Illuvium community. I have a lot of faith in people in general, but people that are so involved with Illuvium, especially, they're really involved with the candidates. They're really involved with who's running, and they take their vote really seriously. In a large economy, maybe like America or Australia or something, maybe voters don't do as much research. I know I don't really. They don't do as much research because there's either too much information or they're not invested in it, right? I mean,
Hmm.
the economy affects them, but it doesn't affect them so heavily that they're that invested in it. Okay, so or at least for most people, if you're a business owner, it might affect you more. You know what I mean? But yeah. Anyways, with Illuvium, your vote really counts towards something. And I think no one takes that there's not really anyone that takes their vote for granted. So they
Hmm.
do the research and they do the discussions, they watch the panels and they get involved in the governance process. And I have a lot of faith in the community to weed out not just bad actors, but weed out people who they don't think would do a good job on these councils, right? A lot of people run the argument that it's a popularity contest, and I've said that sometimes. And maybe without blind voting, it could have been a little bit. I don't think it is. I think people are smart enough, especially in this community, to weed out the people that they don't think should be on the council, or at least not on the initial epoch or whatever it might
Hmm.
be. And they put in the people who are going to go on the council. And I think they do a really good job of that. I've seen the past epochs, and I think they've done a really good job of that.
Hmm.
And I think they will continue to. And that's really what it comes down to. You either breed a smart community, or you have underqualified people coming on there. And you can't really stop underqualified people from going up for vote at the very least, but you can make sure the community is educated enough to deal with that situation. I think that's what we have. We have a nice balance.
Yeah, I think Daraji said something on Twitter, pretty much the same effect, of how the community has pretty much done a decent job to this point of voting in, qualified people to the position.
Hmm.
And honestly, with us getting into Gov V2, being in a bear market, the people who are in our community are the people who are dedicated to Illuvium and
Hmm.
dedicated to its cause and really want to see it succeed. So honestly, we're going to have a truer vote now than we will when we're hitting the next bull run and you get like thousands of more people who are ILV holders flooding into the Discord. And those people who are new and maybe haven't taken the time to do all that research and hey, this next epoch came up, they will be voting popular. So there will be a bit of that, in my opinion, because you'll have a fresh new face, new people. When I first came into the Illuvium Discord and I did my first vote, yeah, I definitely kind of threw a pop. I mean, I had like two ILB, so I didn't have a ton of voting power. And I mean, that's another point, right? It's like the whales, the people who've invested the most, it's quadratic system, but their votes do matter a bit more than someone who might only have two, like I used to. Um, anyway, so now going into this new system, I'm excited to see the people voting and the people putting their name in. And, it might not be all CEOs and CFOs and directors of gamings from other companies. And it will be nice to eventually have that. But there's something to be said about, yes, should we be trying to attract all of that into our community? Absolutely. But I want to see people who are actually excited about Illuvium participating in the governance and leading it because, they're invested, they're excited about the project, they're here to make it better. From what I've seen, are there people who are maybe applying for things that don't have ideal qualifications? Sure. I mean, I don't feel as though I have
Mhm.
ideal qualifications, but I care about the community. I'm going to do what I can to learn. And that's the mentality of most of the people I see running. If they aren't ideal, they are going to learn what they need to on the job. And the best part is they're going to have the support of everybody else on the council. And
Hmm.
if there are any bad actors, well, it's written into Gov V2. We have a way to remove them. We have stop gaps to, keep us from making any major boo boos.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and we can. There's always a vote of no confidence. If you think someone
yeah,
gets in that really shouldn't be there, you can always vote. Well, you can always start a vote of no confidence. I mean, I take that. I don't take that lightly. I take
no.
that quite seriously.
Yeah.
But it is there. So it's not like it's not like everything's going to go to shit or something like that. As you said, people being dedicated to the Illuvium ecosystem is really important. Just a passion for Illuvium and a willingness to learn and improve is also really good. I'm a firm believer of learning as you go if you need to, and the the skill to learn is the greatest skill of all. And I've tried to hone that own skill into myself for as long as I can. It's not perfect, but it's getting there. I believe I actually heard somewhere on YouTube the other day that an IQ test largely tests the ability to learn,
Mm.
because that's the only thing you can't really study for and stuff like that. So basically, the test. I mean, imagine when AI kicks into these IQ tests, but the test kind of evolves over time in a sense, and the better you are at adapting to the situation, the better you are going to do in the IQ test, and potentially the smarter you are or whatever. But the IQ essentially measures your ability to adapt to new situations and improve yourself quickly and efficiently. And that's kind of like, if you don't have the qualification, I think someone with that sort of drive for something like Illuvium will have enough drive to be able to do that to with themselves to make them the qualified candidate. I believe in that as a human condition of sorts, to get a little bit physiological, or not to get a little philosophical. Sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, and another interesting thing is there's going to be so many new people coming into council positions, people who hadn't been on council before. It's going to be brand new, maybe a little scary for them. As a current council member, like, what are you guys doing to make the transition easier for people who are coming on and like discovering the role for the first time? Like, I feel like a lot is going to be decided by these new council members in terms of like, okay, how are we going to run our sub councils and what standards are we going to, like, we have to kind of set our own standards of this is what we're committing to, this is what we're going to do. But is there anything that you guys are prepping to kind of like, here's your onboarding packet?
I am quite literally putting together an onboarding packet. I've been a little bit short on time these past few weeks. I need like a good night or two to like smash it out.
Mhm.
I am working on something along those lines. The other side of things is, but I don't know if we actually had a transitional period before. In this epoch, we've got 10 days or so where
Mhm.
former and new council members are all kind of in the same space for a while discussing and things like that. And I'm hoping that will have a big impact on passing over the torch, so to speak, and
Mhm.
helping onboard the new sub council members. But the other thing is, and I did this myself, especially my first couple of weeks, is you can always reach out to any of the former sub council members. I keep saying sub council members for the current epoch. You can always reach out to any of the current council members and ask for advice and things. Before you're elected, after elected, it doesn't matter. You can always reach out and ask them and get advice while you're on the job, before you're on the job. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
we're all going to be helping each other out and getting through it. The transitional period's a bit hard. I'm going to do everything I can to make it easier, but sometimes it takes a little bit of initiative. If you're really unsure on what's going on, if you're voting on your first proposal and you're like, oh, I really don't know which way I should vote, and I'm not sure, I want to discuss this with the other council members right now because I want it to be my own perspective, go for an unbiased opinion. Ask anyone. Take that initiative. That's going to be on you as a new council member, and that's not something we can really help you with in terms of onboarding. You've got to use your own resources. That's a skill. That's a skill I use to death. Being able to find new resources. I used that to death in university. Pretty
Mhm.
much got me through it. I got pretty good at it. And that's something a lot of my peers that were struggling with classes weren't very good at.
Mhm.
It's an important skill to learn. You're going to need to learn that to be on the council. I think that's probably one of the big ones.
Definitely. I know personally, I hope so. We never see as much talk outside of the Discord on governance as we do right around election time.
Mm,
And personally, I hope that with so many more council members, that the discussion that is happening about proposals and ideas find their way out of the Discord, like more people writing Twitter threads or
mm,
posting tweets, or hopefully more content creators are going to be making governance content. I mean, I've been doing it the last 6 months, not a ton, but bits here and there. And if we just had one content creator, like, hey, you're in charge of the marketing sub council, you're going to be meeting with them. Let's aim to do at least like this, a council catch up once a month. And maybe, hey, you can go for marketing. And if we have these consistent conversations about like, what are your ideas? What are you currently working on? Even if there are moments like today, as we're talking, like there's a lot that happened this last month that were under NDAs, but that doesn't stop us from talking about Illuvium and giving our opinions. It helps the community get a better insight into the people who are leading them and helping to lead this project.
I
So
don't
my
I
fingers
don't want to
crossed.
play devil's advocate too much here, but there's an element that I didn't expect when first coming to the council
Mm-hmm.
that was so firm and so important. I know it is now. Obviously, it didn't take me long to figure that out, but it's very important, and that's the whole idea of a united front, and
Yeah.
that even if you're having internal discussions and maybe you don't agree with some of the other council members and things, once the council is a team, once they speak to the public as they speak to the public on behalf of the team, and they are a team unit. Okay, like
Mhm.
speaking your personal opinion on what's happening inside the council doesn't really work as well as you might think. And you need to make sure it's a coherent council message as much as you possibly can. Um, it's just an important way to build out that system, and it's hard to explain until you're actually in the thick of it. But there's an element of that that still needs to be maintained. So it gets a bit tricky when you have so many council members and they're all going to be speaking. Are they speaking as themselves? Are they speaking from behalf of the sub council, behalf of the IMC? You know, it starts to get really, really muddy, and managing that is
Mhm.
important. That's one of the reasons why town halls are so good, is because it's all the council getting together and talking to the community as a team, as their own little community that are giving information, which is really
I
great way.
I disagree with you. Because frankly, only with going to socials you have to start. It is, in my opinion, part of the council member's duty to be willing to talk about this. And I'm not saying you have to be controversial. You don't even
Hmm.
have to give your opinion,
Hmm.
but bring up the topic to the community, engage the community in what's going on in some manner. So I would encourage council members to engage the community to get their feedback, to start the conversation. And I know it's not all on the council members to do this, but as leaders of the community, I think it is part of their responsibility to be a part of the community, and it's
Hmm.
not necessarily the whole community, you know? People in gaming and strategy encourage you to be active in the arena and the overworld chats. For people in marketing, really be going through those ideas, because there are a ton of marketing ideas that have been put in the ideas channel. You find your spot, right?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
you make sure that you're present, because my biggest argument last epoch is I didn't think the previous councils had really been all that present in the community. It's like, hey, we voted you in, you did stuff occasionally, but no one really knew. Like, you're this mysterious entity. And you guys in particular have done a great job this last epoch of stepping up, being active, writing your own proposals, and engaging the community with the town halls and the media notes that have been coming out a bit more frequently. That's what I hope to see continuing into Gov V2. And whether that is the council's members stepping up and doing that, or, whether I'm elected or not, I'll be right there yanking teeth saying, do you want to interview? Let's interview. Can we have a chat? So,
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to be good to bring it more into the public sphere as much as we can. You obviously have to manage that accordingly, but I think the community council is going to do a good job of managing that a bit better. I think that's very much I see that as one of their roles, that the community council should be bringing it in line all the other councils, even to a certain extent. Like, even if we're having all these discussions, maybe the community council is the one that's going out being like, look, can we create the meeting notes for you? Or, I mean, obviously, we want to create our own meeting notes. That's fine. But maybe
mhm.
the community council is pushing that even more or something. I don't know. But yeah.
I mean, helping to organize the platforms, like I know Rich was there's designing a whole web page where all of this information can
Hmm.
live. But in the meantime, like, that's great that we're going to have that. We don't have that currently. So in the meantime, yeah, coming up with ideas of how, again, we can push the information that we can give. Obviously, we can't give everything, but yeah, and creating those opportunities, whether it's the community council being liaisons with the other councils and having those interviews or discussions. And it doesn't have to be governance related. It's good to know who, like, Scoriox, you're a content creator, so a lot of people know you, but like, not everyone knew Daraji or Annie all that well,
Hmm.
or Blichter, and being able to have you guys on a channel, whether we're seeing your face or, hey, you don't have to show your face. Anyone who wants to come on my channel, you don't have to show your face. We'll put a cute little picture and we'll just hear your voice and we'll have a nice conversation. But it gives people an opportunity to learn who you are, what you stand for, and that gives the voters a more of a reason to vote for you, because they have a better idea of what your opinions are. These debates are great, but 2 minutes is hardly enough time to really get to know a candidate.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to all the debates and panels and things. Should be good.
Sorry, got on a bit of a rant there. I'm
No,
going
that's
to
all good.
end on a non-governance question that I have because it was
Sure.
I find it kind of fascinating. I'm curious to hear your take on it. So, Illuvium Beyond and the leaderboard and the
Mm.
rewards that were promised. It's been about 4 weeks since originally they had said, "Hey, this is coming out," and we ran into bugs, and there's been quite the delay. And there's been a bit of friction in the Illuvium Beyond channel about people who were like, "Hey, you owe us rewards. We want rewards. What are you going to do about it?" And Kieran came in and said something to the effect that it's completely reasonable for them to increase the rewards for the first few weeks to kind of make up for the delay. And I'm kind of, do you agree with this? Do you think that there should be some sort of back pay of rewards? Or do you think we should just be starting from scratch? Has there been any talk about this in the council?
We haven't discussed it heaps yet. No, there's been a lot of other things to talk about first,
Hmm.
unfortunately. Um, so the first thing I'll say is I believe in keeping up with the rewards promised. So if we've missed out on say I'm not sure what it was. If we've missed out on say 3 weeks,
Hmm.
then we should 3 weeks of rewards should not disappear. They should be given out in some way, right?
Okay.
They exist. I don't know if it's a lump sum on the first week back or something like that. But they should not disappear completely if that makes sense. I don't know if I
Hmm.
explained that well. How we do it, honestly, maybe a slight bump up for the next few weeks could be good, but it's definitely a little bit unfair to those on the leaderboard earlier on. And obviously we can't retroactively do it back then
Hmm.
easily because not everyone, it was all bugged out for a lot of people. So you can't just
Hmm.
do that, obviously. I would like the idea of retroactively doing a snapshot of some extent. Look, this needs to go to community. I think I'd like for people to start up an interesting IOP on what they think is the best path forward and see if they get a lot of support. What I would personally do, and obviously me and you know that Illuvium Master is pretty good at pulling a lot of this information off of IMX. I think if someone wrote an IOP that said, check people's wallets on X and Y dates, check if they were to have sleeved absolutely everything that their best possible sleeving on the
Mm.
album on that given date, then check that leaderboard and do that for the past 3-4 weeks or whatever it might be. I think there are definitely people in not just in Illuvium Master but in the community that could pull that off. It's not easy. It will take you a
Yeah.
while.
I
And
was
if
gonna say
people want me to do
that's not quick
if
coding.
people want me to do it, I could probably do it in a couple. It'd take me a couple weeks to sort through it properly and make sure I'm
Mhm.
confident in my answer. But I definitely think it's doable. And if the community was for that, obviously it would include people that hadn't sleeved their things or didn't want to sleeve their things. And it's not a perfect solution, but it
Mhm.
is a solution, in my opinion, and probably the
Yeah.
most fair solution.
I like that
Out-
better than just, like, giving it to the people who are currently there because, like, for
Mhm.
example, when rewards were about to drop, I had spent some extra money and pushed my way up, and I think I hit 10th on at least one day. But again, I was pushing for top 10. But since then, because rewards aren't happening, I've kind of let it fall, and I've fallen various ranks. And I could see people who might have been in the top 10 who maybe aren't there, whether it's due to bugged issues or just like, well,
Mhm.
I'm going to wait for things to get fixed.
Like I think it's a good idea personally, but I don't know if the community agrees. If the community agrees it's
Hmm.
a good idea, I think we could easily pull it off. And there's no major rush on it. If it takes us a few weeks, so be it.
Hmm.
We can have normal rewards running in the background. But yeah, I think if the community was for it, the community was for it.
And I'll be curious. Hey, if you're watching this and you have a strong opinion one way or the other, go ahead and drop it in the comments. Let's get discussion going. If this is any sort of an IIP, if you have a different idea, if you have a better idea, hit us up. That is actually all that we really have to talk about today, though. Pretty short week. Still not a short conversation. Uh, Scoriox, do you have anything left to say? Any last words
Just don't
for
forget
your last interview so far?
don't forget to vote. Don't forget to vote. Yeah, just make sure you're getting to the computer and voting. I was going to say like get out to the offices or the ballots or whatever, but obviously we don't have to do that. We should briefly discuss weighted voting.
Oh, yeah.
It's worth mentioning that the council did already decide to do it, right? And I went against the council a little bit with putting my ideas in the chat. I do apologize to not just the council, but the community for dealing with this. But I wanted to get the conversation started. Now, there might have been better ways to get that conversation started, but I wanted to hear the feedback and discussions from all of the community. And that is why I did what I did. And I'm looking forward. It's been awesome discussion so far. No one in the council thought that people would be against the idea. I mean, we're getting extra options more than anything. But yeah, no,
Wait,
I've been
so hang
really
on.
glad to see all the discussion.
I'm going to interrupt you here. So, just so I understand it, this was something that was being talked about in the council and was going to be pushed forward without talking to the community about it.
No, we were definitely going to talk to the community, but how we were going to do so might have been a little bit less active. That's all.
Oh, okay.
This is more like we've put it out there, and if the community is against us, it gives us a chance to kind of pull it back a little bit better instead of us coming out with a message saying we're doing this, this is being done, and then kind of listening what they think. We're definitely going to tell the community. There's no doubt about that. It's just how active the discussion was going to be. And that's why I liked putting it in ideas chat to make sure that we had a proper forum to discuss it. That's all. It probably would have been discussed either way, but
it just reminded me of the alpha disc conversation, right? If you drop something right before something's supposed to happen, and like in that particular case, there's really strong opinions about how it should go down. I feel like there'd be less backlash for this, but again, it's like, let's aim to make things not as last minute as possible and bringing it to the community's attention to talk about.
Yeah, it was more or less in the name of speed. I'm like, well, this affects voting, which is happening when?
Well, they did this last
I was
epoch
trying to be as quick
too.
as I could.
They did this last epoch too when
That
they
was
made
different. That was more like an emergency. That was an emergency situation. That was very different.
regardless, as there's been a history of some quick, let's just get this through. And
Stand by that. It's different.
yeah.
There were people they saw in the blockchain that heaps of people are splitting wallets and stuff, and they're like, "Oh shit, we're literally being attacked. So let's fix this." But yeah, it would have been good to have more community discussion back then as well. But it definitely felt urgent at the time, that's for sure. But yeah, so just if you guys haven't seen it already, go check it out in ideas, have a discussion. But it looks like we're going to be doing split voting. There'll be lots of education around the subject. Don't worry, I'll be making as many videos as I can. Lots of tweets. We'll be doing the whole works. I think Illuvium will be probably doing some stuff on their channels as well. It will be easy to vote. It looks a little bit more daunting than it actually is. It's very easy. And yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, if anyone wants to check out more of Scoriox's content, link is in the description below. If you want to see more governance, I'm always going to be keeping on top with what's going on with council. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And until the next time, we will see you hopefully in the overworld soon. New overworld private beta 2 should be dropping, right? Soon?
Soon.
Soon.
Yeah.